Thank you. Washington Performing Arts, Children of the Gospel Choir, Music Director Michelle Fallon, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it was beautiful, beautiful. You know, I've been I've been asking myself that question my whole life. Why do we sing? And I want to talk to Laurie and Cameron. So, Laurie, can you kind of tell me a little bit about why you sing?
Well, for me, it's more than just a thing that I do for fun, because my dad sings, my grandma sings, and I'm gonna get emotional, but she passed away, and she's like the most important thing to me.
Oh,
So.
listen, no, I know. This is why we sing, right? This is a really,
Yeah, it's about emotion and making sure that our emotion is expressed through every single word that we sing, and
we have
God
an outlet.
gave us the voice, and we have the outlet to lay our emotions out there, and for people to understand everything that we feel and everything that we say through our song is so much more than just words on a piece of paper. It's just so much more than just sheet music. It's every emotion that you have going through your heart and your mind.
Okay, I'm gonna cry now. Okay, Cameron. Thank you, Holly. Cameron, why do you sing?
Well, music is like a second language to me. Like, I express my feelings, my attitude, and my moods also. And now that I'm part of the Washington Performing Arts Children of the Gospel Choir, I see other youth and children doing the same thing and to accomplish their goals and everything. So it makes me so happy.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bravo. Thank you. I will. You know what? Just take this off with you. Okay, so thank you so much for being with me. I'm just delighted that you're joining us with the second Music in the Mind Sound Health Weekend in partnership with the National Institutes of Health and the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. And I want to say I'm grateful to our colleagues at the NEA, co-sponsor of Sound Health, for their guidance in putting together this panel. I want to thank Mario Rosero, Jennifer Bauman, and Jeanette McCune of the Kennedy Center's education team. Thank you. The NEA provides, I couldn't have done it, provides financial resources, leadership, and support to ensure that our nation's children and youth have access to arts education, something we obviously all agree with. And more than 40% of grantees are based in high-poverty neighborhoods. NEA-sponsored research has shown that arts education is associated with positive, long-term academic, social, and workforce-related outcomes. So make sure you pick up copies out in the lobby of the NEA Music Matters and What School Leaders Can Do to Increase Arts Education. Please take them with you and spread the word. So I want to introduce our panelists now. I'm going to introduce everyone. Hold your applause, if you would, till the end, but everybody come out one at a time. Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institutes of Health, who not only helped to sequence the human genome, but also composed and performed a solo work for organ at age 5. Dr. Kenneth Elpus is Associate Professor of Music Education at the University of Maryland, a leading music education researcher and choral conductor. His work has been funded through several research grants, also from the NEA. Dr. John Iversen is a cognitive neuroscientist studying the connections between music and the brain, focusing on rhythm perception. He's currently Associate Director of the Schwartz Center for Computational Neuroscience at the University of California, San Diego. Melissa Salguero is the 2018 Grammy Teacher of the Year for her work at PS 48 Elementary School in the South Bronx. If you've never heard of the South Bronx, it's in New York. She began in 2010 and has built a music program from the ground up. Dante Rameau is a bassoonist, educator, and co-founder and executive director of the Atlanta Music Project, which provides intensive, tuition-free music education to underserved youth. Laurie Schell has spent 35 years as a senior executive in the nonprofit and education sectors. She served as the inaugural director of the NEA-funded Music Makes Us, the public-private music education initiative in Metro Nashville public schools. During her tenure, participation in music increased to over 60% of the K-12 student population. Rollo Dilworth is an acclaimed choral conductor and composer and currently holds the position of Professor of Choral Music Education and Chair of the Department of Music Education and Therapy at Temple University. He's conducted 60-plus all-state, regional honor, and national honor choirs. But before teaching at the college level, Rollo also taught middle school choral and general music in his hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. A round of applause for this incredible group. Robbie, everybody, thank you. Yay. So I wanted to start by sort of explaining to you my connection to music education beyond the fact that I am a musician. My parents were both high school vocal music teachers, and in fact, I learned about music in probably a crib under the piano when my mother taught all day long private lessons, piano and voice, as a child. So that's my dad and me on the left in the town square of Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, and I was standing next to the rock star of the moment, my dad. And that feeling about him hasn't changed. In fact, he's here with us today. Brilliant music educator. He brought technology to schools and to his high school in Rochester, New York in the 70s, long before people were thinking about that. And on the right is me with my siblings, and I did play a lot of guitar. I had guitar class in middle school, was my favorite thing. And so therefore, it goes without saying, it's hugely important to me. But Dr. Collins, given that you have another job, I would love to understand how, okay, I have to tell you that he told me himself that after a long day, he goes home and improvises on the piano. We know he's a guitarist, we know he sings, he writes music. He serenaded Yo-Yo Ma one evening, had just written a freshly minted song for him, and the text. So all around musician, and then this other thing about the genome and running the National Institutes of Health in his free time. Could you tell me how music impacted your life?
Well, you can see from the picture that's up there, which is a little faded with age. Yeah, that's me in the lower right, probably about 18 or 20 months old, holding some kind of an instrument. I think it's a mandolin and probably making a terrible noise, but that's my family. That's the group I grew up with. Sitting behind me playing the fiddle is my father, who was a folk song collector in North Carolina, but trained as a classical violinist. My mother next to him. On the other side of her, playing the banjo, my brother Brandon, who still plays the banjo quite nicely. In the middle, my oldest brother, Christopher, who plays guitar. And then down the floor next to him, the brother closest to me, who's also a guitar player. In my home in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, what did you do after dinner? You played music. We didn't have a television. By the way, we didn't have indoor plumbing either, and that was another matter. So in between music, occasionally we would take a break from music and my father would read Charles Dickens because that was a nice, different opportunity to learn. But the idea that music would be part of your life every day was just taken for granted where I grew up. Now, we did have a pump organ in that same living room, and it was how I learned music. One of those where you had to pump with your feet in order to make any noise happen, and my father had to build stilts onto it because I couldn't reach the pedals. And that's where I started picking out songs and started to write music by the time I was 5 years old, which seemed like the thing to do because there was not much else to do. And my parents were very supportive of this. I remember one time I spent hours and hours, probably about age 6, picking out the way to play on that pipe organ, that pump organ, a particular tune called Barbara Allen. And I finally got it. And I went to my dad, who was working the barn. I said, you have to stop what you're doing. You have to come and play the violin. And I found my mother, and I said, you're in the middle of writing a play, because she was a playwright. Put down the pen. You got to come and sing the verses. And they both did, of course, immediately. It was like the perfect moment. Let's do a family music thing. So that was a great blessing for me to have that kind of experience. And music became part of my life from the beginning and continues to be this opportunity to tap in a different part of your brain. And yeah, sometimes after a day where the budget didn't quite go the way it was supposed to, and there was some political thing, oh my God, and there was something in the lab that didn't go right, what do? You go home, you sit down at the piano, and you let that part of your brain sort of figure out where your mood is and then bring you back into a place where things are feeling okay again.
Oh, fabulous. How wonderful. And I'm going to venture to say, especially because you have the Brain Initiative now at the NIH, that it also probably changed your brain, having this as a young person.
I'm sure it did. We have very good data on that, which a lot of people haven't heard about. Anybody who's had intensive musical training before the age of 7, if you get your brain imaged with some of the more sophisticated technology, we can tell that because it has physically changed the brain because of the training that happened. Anybody who thinks your brain is just what you're born with and nothing's going to affect it, music is maybe one of the most compelling counterexamples. And what does that say? That also says that that opportunity to develop that skill, there's a window there. And the other thing we are certainly learning is that that ability to develop musical capabilities spills out in other places as well, particularly in language development. The data is stronger and stronger in that regard. So as we are going to hear talking about here in this panel, the importance of music education in the schools, it's not just a frill, it's not just a nice thing to do. It has all of these other consequences in terms of building social relationships and probably improving other skills in school, especially in language.
So thrilled. So when I was asked to put this panel together, I realized that I had pretty good pedigree because everyone in my nuclear family was an educator in music. But then I realized that my training was a really long time ago because I was certified in music ed too. And so I thought, well, I don't know what the status is right now. I don't know what's going on. I hear all these things. I hear there's no music. I hear that it's, there's a little here in dribs and drabs. So I found Ken Elpus, who is going to actually give us a state of the art, as it were, in terms of music education. Go ahead, Ken.
Thanks, Renee. And thank you for sharing your story. My 2 kids are here with us today, and they are also living the life of having 2 music teacher parents. So, kiddos, no pressure. So, as Renee said, my work does focus on the current status of music education and in terms of who's there and what kids are doing and who we're reaching with music education. But before we look at that, you kind of have to look at where it's required. And so, believe it or not, in all but 7 states in the Union, some form of elementary or middle school arts education is required to be given K-6. And that's by law in all of these states. Now, what that looks like from state to state does tend to vary, but that's a pretty strong place that we can start from. So that means arts education legally means visual art, music, dance, and drama, but I can tell you when you look at the data, music has the most penetration of any of those 4 art forms, and we'll talk about that more later. As you move into high school, you sort of get 2 different requirements. The first one, that there must be some sort of instruction in music, and believe it or not, we actually have a pretty good penetration for the legal requirement that high schools have to offer arts education. Again, all but about 6 or 7 states. But then when you look at who actually has to take arts or music education, meaning they must do it in order to graduate high school, to receive their diploma, that picture doesn't look as good. We only have 26 states plus the District of Columbia that actually require high school students to take any arts education. So I think if you're interested in advocating for the arts, the states that are in white here are probably a really good place to start focusing those energies. In terms of who has access to music education, though, we can start to look behind the law and figure out what's actually going on the ground. And according to US Department of Education statistics, about 94% of elementary schools do indeed offer music. Now, the unfortunate corollary to that is the 6% of schools that don't offer any music education are disproportionately located where there's great concentrations of poverty or where there are disproportionate students of color in the student population. And so that's an issue that we need to address. The other thing that we need to address is that a school counts as offering music if they offer as few as 20 minutes of music instruction per week for these elementary school students. So I imagine if you didn't believe that that was a good enough threshold, that this number would come down. Now, in terms of high schools, about 78% of the public high schools in the United States offer music education in any of its forms, meaning band, choir, orchestra, or all of the non-ensemble sort of newer forms of music education. But what we find is that, again, there are systematic differences between the schools that do and do not offer access to music education. The first one, and most important, is school size. As the number of students that attend a school increases at the high school level, the likelihood that that school would offer music education, and in fact would offer a comprehensive arts education, grows dramatically. Additionally, in the public schools particularly, more students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, which is a sort of education research proxy for concentrations of poverty. As that concentration increases, access to music education decreases. So again, an unfortunate circumstance. Let's see. Now, here was an interesting thing in this particular piece of research that I did for the NEA. When you sort of separate out schools by type, public school, private school, religious school, things like that, the public charter schools are the least likely to offer high school music education. Only 27% of charter schools nationwide offer any music instruction. And so that's another area that might be for concern. Once you look past the access, we can start looking at who are the population of students that actually do take us up on this offer of music education. And it turns out that about 1 in 3 students graduate high school having taken at least one full year course in some kind of music education. The ensemble courses of band and choir are the most popular of the music forms that are offered and the most popular of the music forms that are elected. And so we get about just under a quarter of students are either in band or choir. But you can kind of dig behind that number, and work that I did with a colleague at the University of Miami shows that certain students tend to be in music education at the high school level more than others. So male students are underrepresented. Students of Hispanic or Latino ethnicity, students in the lowest socioeconomic status quartile, which has to do with their family's income, their family's level of education, and things like that. Students who are native Spanish speakers, in fact, all English language learners, do not seem to be in elective music education at the high school at the same rate as native English speakers. And then parents who hold a high school diploma or less, their children tend to be less represented in music education. An interesting sort of peek behind this is when you disaggregate this information by band or choir or orchestra, what you start to see is it's actually the bands and the the bands and the orchestras that contribute the most to these disparities, with the exception of gender. Choirs look like all students when you look nationally. There aren't strong differences between the kinds of kids who are in choir and the kinds of kids who are in American high schools, except for the fact that they're more than 2 to 1 female. And as a former high school choir director, I can tell you that, that's true. That's an anecdote, but the data back up my anecdote. It's about 70-30 female to male in choral music at the high school level, and bands and orchestras are even. So it's all the choirs that sort of cause this to happen. Now, why do I care about access to music education and who takes music education? A lot of what this weekend has been about some of the biological benefits of music, and I'm here to tell you that even when you look from a social science lens, there are social science benefits to the biological benefits of music. So one of the things that we see is that students who are in high school music are 30% more likely to apply to college than non-music students. And I know what you might be thinking. Dr. Elpus, you just told me that certain kinds of students are less likely to be in music, and that is true. So whenever I make these comparisons, I use statistical control to equate the groups. So this statistic accounts for the fact that it's a select population of kids that are in music. So it's as close to an apples-to-apples comparison as we can get, which means the benefit to music, I have faith, is real. Additionally, we find that music students gain admission to competitive colleges at the same rate as non-music students. Now I want to unpack that. What that means is if someone chooses to take a music class and instead doesn't choose to take 2 science classes or 2 math classes, sorry, Dr. Collins, they still get admitted to a selective college at the same rate that we would imagine or that we would predict based on their GPA and their SAT or ACT score, which means that choice of electing music education has not disadvantaged them in the college admissions process. And that's something I wish every guidance counselor in the United States would have tattooed on their forehead. Thank you. So after high school, we find that compared to non-music students, shockingly or not, music students do tend to major in the arts considerably more often than non-music students did, about 90% more likely. But when we look at the STEM fields, which I will admit are at least second to arts majors, if not equally important, we find that former art students also major in the STEM fields at the same rate as their non-arts peers, again, showing there is no disadvantage to STEM learning for choosing to spend some of your high school time on elective music education. Importantly, too, for me, more so than some of the other things, is that music students in high school also tend to stay engaged with the arts as consumer or creator beyond high school, well into adulthood. This study I did for the NEA is based on their survey of public participation in the arts. And what we find is that music students, specifically among the arts, are 3 times, actually 3.5 times more likely to play a musical instrument as adults. something that I think we can agree is really important. They're also 2.5 times more likely to sing, whether that be in a community choir or in some other form of ensemble or individual music making. For Renée's industry, they're 93% more likely to attend classical music or opera, which I find particularly exciting, because I also am an opera fan. But there's other artistic outlets as well, and we find that high school music students, more than other students, are actually more likely to take photographs as an artistic endeavor, which to me is really, as someone who enjoys taking photographs as well, is a really interesting sort of non-direct link. But what we find essentially is that music education ignites a passion for the arts that continues well into adulthood and is very easily seen in this social science research. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Ken. So I have to, a couple of little points. So the DC was on that list. Don't you find it extraordinary in a city that offers as much culture as this one does?
So DC is on the list for having an arts graduation requirement, but not specifically mandating that it be offered. And that's sort of an interesting dichotomy.
How does that work?
I did my doctoral work at Northwestern, and the city of Chicago sort of has the reverse. Everyone has to graduate high school in the city of Chicago having taken at least 1 year of music, but there's no mandate for music education in any grade level prior to high school. So you end up with some students in the Chicago schools, for example, who start music as 9th graders. Bands, choirs, orchestras, survey classes, and things like that. But yeah, in a city that has such culture and such investment, it's interesting to see that it's not mandated.
Yeah. And what about charter schools? What do we do about that?
You know, charter schools, I think in some areas of the country do really great work. But fundamentally, and if you're not an ed policy wonk, a charter school is a public school under private management. And so the public gives the funding to those schools in the same way that your local neighborhood traditional public school works, but they're not subject to any of the same requirements. Things like teacher certification, things like what classes need to be offered in order to earn a high school diploma. And so really what ends up happening is that the individual charter school leader gets to determine whether the arts are important to him or her. And so there are some charter schools, I can think of TEP in New York City, where every single student takes a music class because that charter school leader thinks it's important. And other schools and other charter management organizations that don't see the benefit to it.
Thank you. John Iversen has some of the most recent data on how the brain changes with music education over a period of time. He leads the ongoing study called the Symphony Project with the San Diego Youth Symphony. And tell us all about it, John.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel like I'm here really as a representative of many colleagues who are passionate about music and the brain. So I'd like to just give you an overview of some of the things that people have found before going on to some of my own work. This is work by Charles Lim, who's one of the speakers last night, and he'll be offering a great workshop later today. I just showed this. This is the brain scan showing activity in the brain. It's measured by blood flow of a pianist playing piano in the MRI scanner. And really all I try to get across is that music touches a large part of the brain, both increased and decreased activity. So really music involves learning to control the majority of our brains. There's been a lot of news and a lot of interest about what music does for kids' brains, and many, many claims which are increasingly being backed up by hard evidence. So for example, mentioned before about how important music and language, the music-language connection might be. Here's work looking at adults now, adult musicians versus non-musicians, and a particular pathway in the brain called the arcuate fasciculus that's involved in language processing. It was an anatomical study just showing that the strength of this pathway is greater in musicians. It's both instrumental musicians and singers. Okay, so this is one example of finding kind of a biological reason why we see these interesting connections between music, learning, and language. Here's another example, looking not at the structure of the brain, but the function of the brain. This plot basically shows on the top brain responses to a simple sound. You can see on the left side is the response to a musician, which has a nice oscillatory character. On the right is a response by a non-musician, which looks a bit more noisy. On the bottom, basically, is a track of how well the brain, as measured by this response, is following the pitch of sound. And again, on the musician side, you see that the yellow curve has a nice smooth shape, and it's following the black curve, which is actually the actual pitch of the sound, as opposed to on the non-musician side, just a more noisy trace. So this has been work that has been really championed by Nina Kraus and her colleagues. So here's an example correlating total number of hours of instrumental music training on the x-axis with basically how well the brain distinguishes between different speech sounds. Okay, and you can see that as you get more hours of instrumental training, the brain does better and better at noticing fine differences in sound. And so this is one example of why music may really, at the bottom level, start helping our language abilities by saying, well, the musical brain is simply able to pay closer attention to fine details of sound, which is really the foundation of all learning, not just language learning. It all comes through our ears. And in particular, this is a strong effect when you're in a noisy environment. So when you're listening to sound in the presence of background noise, that really somehow the brain is able to pull out that signal better. So a really exciting trend in this direction, really actually understanding development in general, not just with music, are some studies funded by the NIH. And we're all familiar with the idea of going to the pediatrician and getting your height and weight measured, and we have these growth charts, and we plot each kid on the growth chart and see how well they're progressing. What a number of studies are trying to do is develop growth charts for the brain to really understand how different structures in the brain grow over time, and really kind of getting at the deepest question of how does the constellation of different brain regions and connections that each of us has that are all growing at slightly different rates, how does that really make us the individual that we are? Okay, this is a really exciting and vast project to understand the basis of individuality. One example of data is shown in this plot here, which just shows cortical area, just the total area of the cortex, which is the outer sort of part of the brain involved in lots of sensory processing, versus age, going from 2 to 22. You can see there's an overall trend that it's increasing, but what's remarkable is how much variation, how much individual variation there is around that trend. So a deep question is, well, what happens to someone who starts off with, say, a larger cortex? Will they increase at the same rate, kind of parallel the trend? Will they regress down to the mean? So to look at that, there are a number of longitudinal studies that are happening, where now each line represents a single child who's measured over a series of years. So we can begin to see, okay, well, what is the actual trajectory of that particular child? And this is looking at overall area, but we can do this for every region of the brain and every connection in the brain. You really start to get a very rich picture of, what is the exact landscape of each child's brain. And this is exciting for us because we can then start to think about, well, what kind of experiences can we give children and how do those particular experiences affect particular regions of the brain? So of course, we're interested in music. So the question would be, well, does music affect the growth, the rate of growth of different regions of the brain? Does music affect the rate of growth of different connections in the brain? And if so, what are the behavioral consequences of those? This is a kind of a long-term project that we hope to complete over many decades probably, but then we can get to be, well, what does this kind of music do? What does this kind of music do? Because music, after all, is not one thing. There's so many ways to be musical, different instruments, reading, playing by ear, and so on. The symphony study is one example of a study where we basically piggybacked on this larger NIH study called PLING that was measuring the brain trajectories. It was a 5-year study, basically trying to pursue all the goals that I just laid out and really trying to understand how does music change brain growth. So our initial findings have confirmed the impact of music training on phonological processing, that's processing of the sounds of language. We've also found effects on attention, the ability of children to pay attention. And finally, we've made some initial findings linking brain structure to rhythmic abilities. And if you were at Nina's presentation earlier or there last night, there's a really deep connection between rhythm and language that we're finding increasingly in many studies. So this is one beginning step trying to link, okay, well, if this part of the brain is larger, that seems to actually improve rhythm perception. And the part of the brain is the motor cortex, which is an interesting thing that actually the movement part of the brain seems to improve perception of rhythms. So that is an interesting tie-in for the kind of the physical aspect of music. There are other similar studies like the Harmony Project, which Nina Kraus has been involved with, and a study with the Youth Orchestra of LA by Asal Habibi. Just very briefly, some exciting opportunities. We have a lot of focus studies, generally on smallish groups of students where we have a particular intervention and particular outcome measures. But they're also, NIH is the master of these massive, large-scale studies. And I've listed a few, but there are more that we talked about that are even larger. So the last one here, ABCD, Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development, that's studying over 10,000 kids for 10 years, okay, with annual or every other year measurements of brain structure, behavior, and so on. So this is, really a kind of a call to say, well, let's make sure that we're also studying music in these large studies. And so I really hope that's something. And as a kind of a step in that direction, actually, at the request of Sunil Iyengar from NEA, I just looked and said, okay, in this ABCD population, what is the representation of arts? And this is shown in this panel. Really echoing what you said, that the music is certainly the most represented. But we have, 43 kids in this large sample have done some music in their lifetime, and 37 have been doing it actively in the past year. So I think it's a lot of raw material for continued study. I think we really need to combine the large-scale studies and the more detailed small-scale studies. But then also bearing in mind that, neuroscience still can't answer everything. There are lots of questions and lots of aspects in which music is critical, social, emotional, in terms of self-confidence we've been talking. What are the things that the changes we really notice in kids that we still don't quite have a handle on how to equate that with brain changes. So I think we're going to come at it from both directions.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Collins, could you explain, because I had never heard of this before, so explain what nesting is and mention all of us and any other thing you would like to say about this opportunity?
Sure, I'd love to, and appreciate John raising this ABCD trial, Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development, which is a very significant investment in trying to understand what happens between age 9 and age 19, with more than 10,000 kids already enrolled, with all kinds of measurements of what kind of things have an impact on their development, which includes their school education, their exposure to drugs is in there too, their socioeconomic circumstances, and we should definitely be trying to figure out how, in that cohort, music is affecting all kinds of other aspects of their development. So I'm delighted. What we're basically then trying to do is to nest within one of those large-scale, longitudinal studies the right kinds of questions, the right kinds of measurements. With ABCD, that includes brain imaging, that's part of it. So you're actually going to be able to look anatomically at what's happening in the brain to these kids under various influences. The newest one of these, which is going to start enrolling kids next year, is called All of Us. And this is the most ambitious project NIH has ever undertaken, because we aim to enroll 1 million Americans in a long-term study of health and illness. We already are up to 108,000 as of today. We decided we would do the first year without trying to enroll kids because of the really significant challenges here in terms of consent. But by next year, we'll start enrolling kids between birth and 6 years of age. And we will very much want to use that as an opportunity to nest the appropriate questions about how music affects development. And there will be a lot of kinds of data that we can collect, both by asking questions, but also by having individuals as part of this study walk around with wearable sensors, like I have 2 of them on today, a Fitbit and an Apple Watch, the sorts of things that can really keep track of what kinds of experiences and exposures are happening. And all of that data is going to be accessible to anybody who has a really good idea about what to do with it, with all the individual identifiers removed. So this is going to be an engine for discovery of things that previously were out of reach. So this is the kind of moment to do that. You put that together with the Brain Initiative, which is now trying to figure out how those 86 billion neurons between your ears do what they do, and is figuring out how those circuits work. we're going to be in a very interesting place in the next decade to sort this all out. And then maybe to figure out, how could we individualize the approach to music education? Because we're all different. Kids are all different. How do you not do the one-size-fits-all approach, but something that really is ideal for that kid, that is going to open windows of opportunity to them they wouldn't otherwise have had?
Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this and including all of this. And I wonder how it's decided. Is there a committee that sort of says, from the outside, we're going to nest these concepts or these ideas?
Oh, there's always a committee. And, and they're pretty tough about this, because one thing you can't do is to just measure everything on everybody, or it's like the Christmas tree where you added too many ornaments and the whole thing fell over. So you have to be really thoughtful about what is going to give you the most information, how much can you afford to do, what can you ask participants in these studies to do before they say, okay, that's too much, I quit. Because they're our partners, we don't want to put too much on them, but we want to learn everything we can. I think a lot of the things we're talking about here are not particularly heavy burdens, so I'm hoping they will fold into whatever the committee decides to do.
Fabulous. Well, between science and that child is a practitioner, whether it's a music therapist in terms of so many of the issues that we're trying to address, or in this case, if it's a teacher. And we all know, it's, you know, somebody's fond of telling me, we all know who the good teachers are in any school. But when the Grammy decides to anoint someone on an annual basis, then those of us in music and who love music pay attention. And when I saw this piece on television, which I think you are about to see now, I was incredibly impressed with our Melissa Salguero. So let's watch this little bit from CBS This Morning.
Good morning. Well, when Melissa Salguero first arrived at PS48 7 years ago, there was no school song, no instruments, there wasn't even a mascot. Now the proud Tigers of PS48 have an award-winning teacher and music throughout the halls.
And 1, 2, ready?
In sync with the sunrise. If not yet with one another.
Almost.
These fifth graders at PS48 in the Bronx arrive an hour early for band practice.
You gotta push more air in the instrument.
Instruments in hand for just 4 days. Melissa Salguero guides the first-time musicians through every note.
Oh, you fixed it at the end. You notice? They come in before school because we have so much need for them to be in the classroom and have them get their math and their English. So band is a before-school activity. Smooth, make it smooth now, you guys ready? Smooth.
Believe it or not, progress comes quickly here. This is last year's band performing music from Adele. Just a few months after getting their instruments.
At the end of the day, it's not going to be Carnegie Hall, you know, but that's not what we want. What I want is I want the kids to get the experience of working hard. Have you ever seen an instrument with a carrot before? Teaching this age especially, it has to be something dramatic. It has to be something that's going to grab their attention.
Making a musical carrot or a keyboard of bananas
make a song with it.
can do that.
I never had a teacher like this. Like, she's different in so many different ways. It's, like, amazing.
Isel Sierra, Rushawn Green, and Luis Galvez are in the 5th grade band and chorus.
She makes us feel special about herself. She doesn't care how we sing.
What we're trying to say is that she makes our day. She makes us feel great.
And if you've ever doubted the power of a great teacher,
you're getting emotional.
Yes, I am.
Watch Luis talk about what a big deal Miss Salguero really is.
Not every day you get to meet a person that is so important in your life, and that will teach you a bunch of things about life and stuff.
PS48 has its challenges. Located in one of New York City's poorest neighborhoods, most families here earn less than $25,000 a year, and 22% of the school students are homeless. Still,
I feel like I was born to teach at this school. And you get a recorder! You get a recorder!
How do you build a music program from the ground up?
So when
how do you do that?
When I started, it was just me and a guitar, singing Don't Stop Believing.
It's been so long since I've been here.
Gianna Martinez is one of Miss Salguero's first music students here. She now performs in community theater and attends a competitive performing arts high school.
She gave me a stage to perform on whenever I was in band. And so I realized that I love being on stage, and I love to act, and I love to sing.
Look out, 'cause now you're confident. There you go.
That love of performing and affection for this Music Educator Award winner is why these students are up before dawn every day.
If there were no band, then I would only see Miss Salguero for 1 day a week. But then I'd rather see her for the whole week.
They come to school for music. They do.
They come to school for you. What does that mean to you?
No one's ever put it that way. I would love for them to think back of their time here, not remember, oh, I gotta wake up early for band practice. I want them to remember I worked so hard. If they can remember that, I'll be happy. I'll be so happy.
Yeah. Teachers have been taking a bad rap in the last 18 months in this dialogue about what's wrong with our schools. And what makes a great teacher, Melissa, from your perspective?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to be able to speak about music education, because as you see, it is transforming lives in the South Bronx. I had a teacher who transformed my life when I was in 5th grade. As little as this sounds, as insignificant as this moment in history, she made me a safety patrol. She gave me an orange belt, and she said, go guard that hallway. And at that moment, I decided I wanted to help others. I wanted to spread. I wanted to just help and just give to the world. And that moment with Ms. Bauer in 5th grade at Verde Elementary School in Boca Raton changed my life. There's been so many, and I'm sure every single person in this audience can think of one person, one teacher that has impacted their life. So when I'm in the South Bronx and I have no instruments, and I believe in music education so much, and we have the numbers, and I keep hearing no's. We need funding. Yeah, no, it's not gonna happen. Well, I'm really stubborn, so I say, yes, it is.
So explain why science. So one thing that isn't really fleshed out in
Right.
that is that you're not a science teacher, though. You're a music teacher.
Well, actually, I'm kind of both, because during the summer I have this crazy job where I am literally a mad scientist. I go around summer camps and I perform science experiments and teach that to children all over. And so, like I said, you have to grab your children and have them in the palm of your hand now, because they have all this technology and they're on the screens all the time. But you saw those faces when I drilled a hole in a carrot and then played it. Even some of your reactions it was awesome, yeah. But you know what else? I take my students' interest, mesh it with technology and science. So I'm teaching them concepts that aren't very tangible, that you can't really see without the assistance of sensors and whatnot. And so I have a demonstration. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it, but can I give it a go?
Please.
Okay. So when we're talking about resonance, how do you teach that? How do you say there's vibrations and other things vibrate too? And if they're vibrating at the same speed, at the same frequency, they go together. Even if one, you know, this is Pepper. I don't always travel with Pepper, but I brought it today. So, and this is a drum. And the trick with this is not to sneeze, or else it will go everywhere. So what I do is I bring the kids in real close, and I say, guys, come here, I got something to show you. And I have this Pepper in the drum, and I say, look what happens when I start striking the drum. Now, I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm just going to do it anyways, because maybe they'll see it in the live stream. If not, you can probably YouTube this. So then I go, well, I wonder if I can get it to move without striking it. And you can feel even the energy in the room right now. What is she going to do? This happens in my class. This is exactly why I use science. But I'm also very dramatic, so I'm going to make you wait. So I say, oh, yes. Yeah, because patience is important to teach the children. And this will be my solo debut performance at the Kennedy Center. Where I will now sing into the drum. So you might want to turn off the microphone for just a few seconds here. Okay, here I go. And the students see it moving, and I'm going to actually make it so that the pepper actually will form a circle. It's going to go really high now. So I don't know if you can see it. You guys can see
Hold
it
it
here.
up too, because they can see that from underneath really well.
Yeah. Oh, you can. Oh, bingo. There we go. Yeah. Very interesting. So we talk about frequencies, and the kids are like, oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, but why is that happening, Miss Salguero? And right then, some of you probably already thought, why is that happening? I have them, and they're actually making my lesson for me, because my whole teaching approach is based upon the students driving the bus of the lesson. I am a tour guide, and I am showing them all these really cool things. Sometimes it gets some applause, and other times they're like, that was not cool. What are you doing? And that's okay. And so visual representation of these concepts that are very difficult to understand. And it gets them excited. And they buy into music. And I know that not every single one of my students will become a music major, I can hope, but but the truth is that they're going to be lawyers. They're going to be police officers. They're going to be teachers, some of them. And I want them to become music lovers and supporters for their entire life, because they are the ones, similar to this group in here, that are going to raise their voice when music programs are being cut all over the nation. They're going to be the ones that say, hey, we need a music program in our charter school. It's not acceptable not to have it. And here are the numbers that justify why we need it. So,
That is so fabulous. Thank you so much. Are there other teachers out here?
Any teachers?
Stand up. Yeah, teachers. Everybody stand up, all the teachers. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And thanks to all of you for the work that you do. This is going to sound, I just think you're the future, because you're training our next generation. You're, as you said, exciting them. And by the way, drama works great for adults too. I'm an opera singer. I mean, it's drama all the way. Thank you. Dante Rameau, we're going to look at two models now, one out of school, which means after school, before school, on weekends, and one in school. And Dante Rameau actually has founded the Atlanta Music Project, or AMP, offering both choral and instrumental music instruction. And you've grown this organization from 19 students to 350 in just a few short years, with 50 teaching artists, a lot of tours. I mean, it's incredible. Over 40 different countries, and this is based on an El Sistema model. Can you talk about the program, and also tell everybody what that means, El Sistema?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Ms. Fleming, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm not sure I'm going to follow this up, but I will do my best. I guess I should start with saying that I'll need your presentation and your presentation for my funders. So El Sistema is a music education program based in Venezuela, and they have basically mastered how to go into a community that is underserved, under-resourced in their country, in Venezuela, and provide amazing music education programs to the point where they're now producing some of the world's most accomplished professional classical musicians, such as Gustavo Dudamel, the conductor of the LA Philharmonic, and some of the youngest members of the Berlin Philharmonic. And they're now up to 700,000 students, and they've been doing this for about 40 years, since now 50 years almost, since 1970. So I had the chance to do a little bit of studying of this program. I went down there as part of a fellowship, a one-year fellowship, and I got to learn how they do it. And so I took what they showed me, and I took what I've learned as a professional bassoonist and someone who has worked a lot assisting music teachers in schools, kind of doing like the coaching sessions that you, as a band director or an orchestra director, would have a professional musician come in and teach your students. So went back to Atlanta and was really inspired, and I took a risk, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. So as Renee said, we do have choir as well as orchestra, and our students this past summer got to perform behind Alison Buchanan, who's a British soprano. Ms. Fleming, you're welcome to come anytime as well.
Okay.
We do a lot of different kinds of world music in our choir and our orchestra program. And I want to focus more on the impact on the students, because I do need studies to help fund our program to prove the why music education is important. But my other challenge is also to convince parents in the neighborhoods that we serve why music is important for their child. The data stuff doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't really affect whether a parent will or will not put their kid in music. It's more about the personal and the human story about what music does for their child. So just a little bit about the organization. This is a lot of mumbo jumbo. You can ignore most of it, but the center circle is sort of our headquarters. If you can think of a conservatory music program, maybe like a Juilliard pre-conservatory program, or a Merit School of Music in Chicago, or a James Levine School of Music here in DC. That's our headquarters, and we're working on that. It's coming. The red circle, we call those our partnership sites. Those are really modeled on what they do in Venezuela. It's 4 or 5 days after school, and the kids really have to commit to coming, and to the point where they can't do basketball and football. So it's a real commitment. But because they're there for so long, we can really get them playing at a high level very quickly. And then our black circle, those are our future, we're going to call them satellite programs, and those are going to be partnerships with any entity that wants to have music in their out-of-school time. It could be a church, or it could be a rec center, or it could be a YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, or even a charter school. So that's how we're going to expand, and that's how we're going to get from today's 350 to tomorrow's 500 or more. And so we work mostly in Southwest Atlanta. If you know the city of Atlanta, we're kind of towards the airport on the southwest side. This is the building that we're going to work on for our headquarters, and we hope, fingers crossed, if we can complete our capital campaign, it'll look like this in March of 2019 or so. So we do have a longitudinal impact evaluation because, as I said, I do have to raise money and I have to have good data points. And so we are working with Dr. Becky Eason and Dr. Chris Johnson at the University of Kansas. And they're actually looking at our students at one of our sites, which happens to be a charter school, where we have a choir program there. And over 3 years, the results are unsurprising to many of us. And so I'm not going to talk about them because these are pretty obvious that this would happen. But you can see that our AMP 1 is those that have been there for 1 year, and AMP 2, those that have been there for 2 years. And so obviously the English GPA is stronger, math is stronger, and overall GPA is stronger. So round of applause for music. We all know this. So. So we're going to keep going with this study, and hopefully we'll see good results. But I want to talk about, and also when you have those kinds of results, it leads to other partners coming in. That's been a big secret of our success. So Clayton State University came to us, and they said, we want to establish a scholarship fund for your students. So now our students, Clayton State being about 20 minutes south of the city of Atlanta, any of our students who end up wanting to go to Clayton State as music majors or music minors go for free. And so, again, what I've seen on a human level is that when people see kids working hard, it's hard not to support them and to want to see them do great. It's kind of like a business proposition. You know, what skin do you have in this game? And music gives people a chance to see that kids have skin in the game. And so this is the result. So I'll talk, whoops, this way. There we go. So this is Donovan. He has been with us since he was about 6 years old. He's a violinist. And here he is performing his first recital, maybe 5, 6 years ago. And so Donovan got the chance to go to Mexico City to perform in a 150-member youth orchestra of students from all over the Americas. It was brought together by Gustavo Dudamel while he was doing a tour with the Vienna Philharmonic in the Americas. He said, I want to do something with all the young people in the Americas. So he invited students from El Sistema-inspired programs from the United States, Canada, Venezuela, Argentina, and Puerto Rico. And so that's Donovan. You can kind of see him with the flat top in the bottom left corner there. And we went on NPR, the local NPR station in Atlanta, to talk about his experience. And he was in 8th grade last year. And so I was coaching him a little bit about giving more than one-word answers. And, we were in the green room and it wasn't quite working out. So I said, you know what, Donovan, just don't worry about it. Just speak your mind, and whatever's on your mind, just say it. You're a smart kid, just go for it. And so, is one of the things that he said towards the end of the interview that really let me know, okay, he's going to be okay. And I'll take a little bit of credit for allowing music to be in his life and for him to be able to learn a little bit about himself. So at the end of the interview, Lois asked him, the host, Lois Reitzers, asked him, are you a different violinist after this experience? And he said, I saw all the energy and enthusiasm that the kids played with. They play like they're about to try out for the New York Philharmonic. They play like they want to do this. They play like that instrument is their only, like it's their life. At times I got emotional while we were playing, but I didn't show it. And so what's so important to me about that is I feel like now Donovan has a sense of agency. He's been offered the chance to see what is possible. He was involved in this youth orchestra that was comprised of kids just like him, so he knows he can do it. And this belief is very, very important. It can save a lot of money. I'm more of an on-the-ground type of person. I'm not so much in the research. And what I've seen is that a lot of programs don't arm kids to have their own ability made better. And so with our program, we're trying to use music as a tool to give kids characteristics and give kids real weapons, personal weapons to do well in their life. And I think no matter what Don ends up doing in his life, he's going to be just fine. So.
Thank you. Thank you. So how do you I know, it's amazing. May this just create rings throughout the city of Atlanta and beyond, far beyond. How do you recruit?
We actually partner with schools.
With the schools.
Of course, we're advocates of music in the schools. I should probably say that. What we want to be is, so if there's a student in your class who you've seen as an amazing talent on whatever instrument, and they could really benefit from private lessons and from being in an ensemble with kids the same age that are all kind of focused on being really good. That's what we want to be there for. So we have to go to schools, we go to recreation centers, and honestly, we go door to door. It's really grassroots work. And I think just because there's a program in an under-resourced, underserved neighborhood does not necessarily mean that kids are going to come walking through your door. And you really have to get on the ground and create relationships with teachers, neighborhood leaders, things like that.
And parents, how do you get them involved? Because that has to go with it, I assume.
a lot of relationship building. The good thing about having an after-school program is that the parents have to pick up their kids every day. And so we have these long conversations. And parents call me all the time asking me about this and that. And so trust, it's for the parents we work with, this is kind of new to them a lot of times. So trust is a big way to keep parents on board.
Super. So Laurie Schell created Music Makes Us in Nashville, a public-private partnership. It's a massive success story, and you've been doing this for a long time, so a continuation of what Dantes begun. Please tell us about your program.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much. One might not think of Nashville as being a multicultural center, but it has become so. With a school district of about 80,000 kids, the immigrant population is steadily increasing. After English and Spanish, the third most spoken language is Kurdish in Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, who would think that? It has become an urban school district. So one day, some 6 years ago, our former mayor, Carl Dean, looked at his music council and said, hey, we're Music City. We got to connect the dots here between what we're doing on stage at the Grand Ole Opry and what our kids are getting in school. So how can we make a world-class music education program that can feed the growth and wellness of our city? And that was pretty extraordinary to come out of the mayor's office. So that's where this idea was born. It was born as a collective impact project, which means everybody has to do everything. So the foundational tenets are, it was about equity for all of our 83,000 students. It was about access to music education, quality music education, and music literacy. We call it literacy, but it's really, music literacy is the start, and we know that leads to other kinds of literacy as well, language literacy. So it was conceived as a public-private partnership. The mayor's office had a skin in the game, as we call it. The music industry donated millions of dollars. Our largest donor and benefactor by far was the Country Music Association Foundation and the school district. So with the three legs of the stool, we rallied around to make this effort work. And as you see pictured here, these are students at Glencliff High School. So it wasn't just about chorus, band, and orchestra. We thought, if we're going to get more kids involved in music, we got to go where they are, where their interests are. So we started a mariachi program, world percussion programs, songwriting programs, rock band programs, which are quite popular, as you might guess, country bluegrass programs. Another thing you might not realize about Nashville is not just about country music. We do more than that in Nashville. So we like circles too. And ordinarily, if I were talking about, what difference does it make to our kids, the kids would be in the center. But I wanted to show you what the levels of engagement needed to be to make this all work. So this is really a structural idea. An advisory board was made up of mayor's office, elected officials, philanthropists, higher ed, K-12 education, corporate friends and partners, nonprofit partners. So they were kind of the think tank, the brain trust in the middle. But moving out, we had to engage the whole community. So parents and the business sector, the music industry, of course. All of the sectors have a role to play, a continuing role to play. And, their interest and engagement will come and go and depends on what's happening at any given time and where we are in the program. But it's important to reach out to all the parts of your community, not just the ones who you think could give you money, although that's an important piece of this. So we too did a study. It was not a brain study. We weren't that sophisticated, but we needed to prove to ourselves, to our funders, to our community that this was making a difference for our kids. So we did a correlational study and found that kids with more than 1 year of music, and that seems to be key here, these numbers jumped up a lot if kids had more than 1 year of music study at the high school level. They're more likely to graduate on time, they come to school more often, and that translates into 11 more days every year, which is a lot in a school year. They earn a higher grade point average and higher scores on ACT, English, and math. Also, discipline referrals are reduced because of their engagement in music. So we felt like we had some legs to stand on here. This is making a difference for our kids. It's still not an easy thing to do. Participation was and is the holy grail for this. We started with a good amount of participation in our schools. Thankfully, all of our elementary schools do have music education with a credentialed music teacher. So I didn't have to fight that battle when I came on. But there were a lot of gaps, particularly at the middle school. You know, middle school can be that forgotten wasteland. Any of you relate to that out there? So we worked very hard to shore up that pipeline at the middle school level. So in 5 years' time, we did increase the number of students participating in music by 3,600 students. And the fastest growth was in the middle school because of those augmented programs. And we had significant increases in our traditionally underserved populations, particularly the Hispanic population, English learners, and economically disadvantaged kids. So it's working. It's a lot of work. It never stops. Advocacy is a huge part of the work that we do, and it has to happen every day, and everybody has a role in it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Laurie. Can you tell the story of Faz, if I say his name correctly, Farzin Degan, because I was very moved by that when I read about that. You know, given the refugee crisis around the world and the fact that we also have, we talk about immigration all the time, I thought this was, music has a role. Tell us about that.
Farzin was one of our students at Overton High School. He was an Iranian refugee and came to this country with his parents, really without having any English background at all, and being rather lost, as you might imagine. And the same year that he came was the year that we started our World Percussion program at Overton. And the world percussion teacher, the drumming teacher, got connected somehow with Farzin. There were advanced students in world drumming, but there was also a class that we affectionately called the newcomers class. And every student in that class was from somewhere else and had just moved to Nashville and moved to this country. And none of them spoke English, but they had the language of drums. They had the drums in front of them. They did call and response. They looked each other in the eye. They played music. It didn't need words. It didn't need a lot of technique. It got them involved from day one. So Farzin got connected with that program, and then we came to learn that he was somewhat of a virtuoso musician himself on the Comanche. And by the time he graduated, he had earned a full ride to Berklee School of Music.
Yeah, pretty great. Thank you.
So we didn't teach him that instrument, but I think we gave him a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of knowing that he could do something great.
Oh, fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So in our phone conversation, you literally said it takes a village. And, you know, this is that involvement from the mayor. And I know about this from Chicago because Rahm Emanuel was very committed also to keeping arts in Chicago public schools. Yo-Yo Ma and I spearheaded in the beginning a program with Ingenuity to do just that. And he said, we are not cutting arts. So it takes that kind of commitment. And did you find between you, Dante, also, is it harder to do this within the public schools, or is it easier than to create an outside program, or is it the other way around? Or is it all hard?
We just wanted to create a program that allowed kids to really excel. My background is in the sort of conservatory model where you know, competitions and auditions and fancy schools and this kind of stuff. So I wanted to provide that sort of environment for kids in the communities that we serve. But I haven't met very many principals or you know, teachers that are not interested in supporting music. I mean, everyone I think knows it's important, in my experience.
I would say that in the public schools, all means all. And so the challenge is access and opportunity for all students, not just for a select few. That's the challenge. The other challenge is to find teachers like Melissa. So it's those magical teachers who will just grab the kids and keep a hold of them until they graduate and they can, you know, go off on their own. But that's the challenge.
Well, and I think technology was also on your music technology, of course, in a major recording hub like Nashville that made sense to me. But Nina Kraus charged me when she said, Renee's going to go organize this panel on music education, with talking about new models of teaching music. You know, most of us grew up with the orchestra, band, chorus, and we were all basically learning the same Western classical music and some Sousa in there as well. And I know there are programs, USC for one, that is sharing a different model now. Can you speak about that? And Ken, also, I think you had some ideas about how much that was growing or not.
It's growing by leaps and bounds. We were given some wonderful funding by the Recording Academy and other folks to build a recording lab in one of our high schools, in Pearl Cone High School in Nashville. And a lot of the services were donated, a lot of the equipment was donated. It's a world-class recording studio. That's valued at over $1 million. It's better than some of our Music Row recording studios. And students gravitate toward that. We also feel that it's really important, though, to give them that foundational. Don't just learn the beatbox. Don't just learn how to, you know, manipulate the engineering piece of it. Learn how to listen, learn how to hear, learn how to make those sounds yourself. So it's really a both and. It's got to be both and.
Thank you, well said. Rollo Dilworth, you know, most studies seem to be about instrumental music. Can you speak to our discipline and tell us what's so great about singing? What are the benefits of singing?
No pressure, right? First of all, let me ask you this question. How many of you sing? Not even can sing. How many of you do sing? Okay, that's just about everybody in this particular room, and that's really exciting. We know historically that singing is something that is very accessible to everyone in terms of making music. And I think some of our colleagues have talked about earlier, one of the things that levels the playing field a little bit for students who are at lower socioeconomic levels is this notion that anyone can engage in singing. You don't have to purchase an instrument or worry about the economics of purchasing an instrument or fundraising to purchase an instrument, because that instrument is within. And as we've listened to a lot of the brain research that is taking place and has taken place, we know that choral singing certainly has a lot of great benefits. First of all, do you all know that there was a choral impact study by Chorus America in 2009 that says that 42.6 million people in the United States participate in more than 270,000 vocal and choral ensembles. That's a lot of people, and those are just the people who admit that they sing, right? So we know that singing has a lot of wonderful benefits in that when you have people in sync working together, synchronized in order to sing and to create sound, that they are building their skills in collaboration. They're building their skills in creativity. They're building their skills in teamwork. And we are finding that so many young people in particular are gravitating toward choral music because of the text. And the text enables the singer, especially the adolescent, to find connections with that text. They can develop their social identity, they can develop communication skills, and certainly we've heard about the language skill development that results from engaging in musical activities. I certainly want to impart to you this notion that if we can continue to find ways to use choral music, particularly because it has text, as a way to connect with the social and emotional development of our young people, we will continue to see results in which they are better citizens, in which they are more likely to give back to the arts, and they are more likely, of course, to pass on that singing to others. I want to make a little bit of a connection between choral singing and social emotional learning, because I find myself being in the middle of that particular kind of research. In my own work, I am a conductor and a composer and a choral musician, choral music educator. And I specifically have been in my own musical journey as an educator focusing on writing music, arranging music that tends to hopefully connect with and therefore enhance the social emotional learning skills of students. What do I mean by that? Helping them, writing music that will help them to think about what it means to collaborate. Writing music that will help them to empathize and connect with the emotions and feelings of others. Writing music, hopefully, that will give them the opportunity to think about what it means to make better decisions as they move forward in their own individual development and as they engage in social, cultural dynamics with others. So having said that, I want to talk about those benefits for just a moment, because I do believe that we have a responsibility to not just teach music, as some of my colleagues have said, but to use music as a tool to teach people and use it as an opportunity to help them to understand more about who they are as well as the world around them. How many of you who are singers, who sang in school, found that there was at least one song or maybe multiple songs that helped you to grow as a human being? Not just grow musically in terms of learning about three-quarter time or learning about, scales and modes, and et cetera, but you learned something about your life, or you learned something about the lives of others, and you were able to apply that music, that choral music, that text perhaps, to your growth as an individual. How many? Yeah, I would imagine most of you, right? And I cannot tell you how many young people and even adults who have come to me and have said this, and I'm putting it in quotes because it really it's something that happens a lot. People say to me, music changed my life, or music saved my life. Music helped me when I was in this particular crisis. Music helped me when I was struggling with this. Music helped me to cope when a family member or a loved one passed away. There are so many ways in which we find that music, especially music that has text, will connect with others and help us to maybe even connect on a deeper level with our own emotions. Because I am committed, and I know many of those of us who are teachers are committed to using music as a tool to enhance the quality of life of individuals, not just using music for musical outcomes, we can begin to see the connection between music education and music therapy a little more clearly, perhaps. One of the things that I enjoy doing in my role at Temple University is I get to see students who are involved in the music therapy major, and I get to see students who are involved in the music education major, and of course I get to work with faculty members. And more, we're starting to see the connections between the two and to realize that there's hardly a separation. Obviously, students who are training to be music educators are first and foremost being trained to use music for musical outcomes. So students will have a better sense of pitch, a better sense of rhythm. Students will have a better understanding of two-part harmony, four-part harmony, etc. Students will have a better understanding of sonata allegro form, all of those wonderful things. And those things are absolutely great. If you look at the music therapy side, we're looking at music as a therapeutic tool to perhaps address needs and to bring about outcomes that may not necessarily first and foremost be musical ones. Because music therapists will perhaps be trying to enhance the quality of life of an individual who might be in intensive care in a neonatal unit, may be working with patients who are in hospice care. They may be working with prison populations. They may be working with kids in school populations. So musical outcomes may not be the very first thing that music therapists are thinking about if they are working to treat some particular challenge.
Rollo, could I please interrupt? Are there music therapists here?
Yes, where are my music therapists? Okay, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank
Yay.
you. Thank you.
Yay.
So we could do so much more. Oh my goodness, we could do a whole panel with each one of us here today, but I've gone way past my time here.
No
could
worries.
you lead us in song, please?
Okay, absolutely. So again, my thanks to Renee. Thank you for allowing me to come. Thank you to music educators and to music therapists, and we will continue to see how those worlds will continue to come together in order to make a positive difference in the lives of the people that we serve. So here's what I'd like for you to do. I'm going to teach you a song, whether you say that you are a singer or not. I think that you are going to do just fine, and Dr. Collins is going to help, and I've got these wonderful Washington Performing Arts Children of the Gospel coming back to help. So here's what I want you to do. Since we all know for sure now, through all this wonderful research that's been presented, how much we can deepen our own collaboration and teamwork skills through synchronizing ourselves, let's first do it with rhythm. So let's have an F chord there. So we're going to do this. Just patch and clap. Okay, you're going to repeat after me. And here's what I want you to do. How about if you snap, and that way I can make sure that everyone hears those notes. So you're going to sing this. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it. I'd like to hold it in my arms. And keep it. Can you sing that one more time? And I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it. And keep it company. And keep it. Now, everybody keep the beat. I'm going to teach another part. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it in my arms and keep it company. Try that for me. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Good. I'd like to hold it in my arms and keep it. Now let's sing two parts. Pick a part. Go. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it in my arms and keep it. Keep that beat going. I'm going to teach another part. It goes like this. Try that. See. Good. Good. Three parts. parts. Pick a part. I see. Good. One more line. I'm going to teach one more line. It goes like this. Teach the world. Teach the world. Teach the world to sing. Try that. Teach the world. And teach the world. Going up one more. Teach the world to sing. Now pick a part and let it fly. Go. I sing. Create your own line if you like. One more time. One more time. Go. Can I have you do an acapella? Can I do an acapella one more time? Can I do an acapella one more verse?
Yeah, absolutely.
Acapella. We're going to do an acapella. Sing your part. Acapella. Here we go. Sounding great. Last time. Last time. And give yourselves a hand. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Children of the Gospel are going to sing one last song. And I want to thank all of my panelists who've been so magnificent. Really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
There's not a friend like the
Repetition. It goes. Can't nobody do me like Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Can't nobody break me. Can't nobody break me. Break me like Jesus. No, not one. Not one. No, not one. Not one. Can't nobody shake me. Can't nobody shake. Where's your shake? Shake you. Shake me like Jesus. No, not one. Not one. Oh, no, not one. No, not one. Can't nobody do me. 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 If not a friend like the Lord Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No, not one. No, not Thank you. Oh, that was great. That's what it's all about. Woo! Power of music. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.